Let's try and zip through things fairly quickly. Minister, go ahead.
Well, hello and good morning, everyone. Just 2 weeks ago, I shared our government's first steps to respond to the Federal Court of Appeals decision on the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion. Today, I'm here to talk about the second part of our path forward. First, let me reiterate that this government is committed to renewing Canada's relationship with Indigenous peoples. No relationship is more important to this government than the relationship with Indigenous peoples. For too long, Indigenous peoples have had to fight to have their rights recognized and implemented. As a government, we are committed to doing things differently. It is why, for the first time, we co-developed with First Nations and Métis leaders an Indigenous Advisory Monitoring Committee to help oversee the safety of this project. It is why our Indigenous consultation on TMX were more extensive than ever, though it's clear that it still fell short. We took these steps to ensure the voices, knowledge, and counsel of Indigenous peoples would be at the table. While the court acknowledged that the framework that we put in place was sound, and we acted in good faith when we consulted on TMX, it decided that there was more work to be done in Phase 3 of these consultations. We set a high bar to begin with, but we understand that we can and must do better. Which is why, after careful consideration, our government has decided that we will not appeal the court's decision. We have decided to follow the guidance from the Federal Court of Appeal. We believe that we can and must move forward by engaging in a meaningful and focused consultation with Indigenous groups on the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion project. So with this in mind, our government has decided to reinitiate Phase 3 consultations with Indigenous groups impacted by the project. We are going to do things differently this time. First, government representatives on the ground will have a clear mandate to conduct meaningful consultations and be empowered to discuss reasonable accommodations with Indigenous groups on the issues that are important to them. Second, we're going to work with First Nations and Métis communities and seek their views on how to get Phase 3 right. Third, we are more than doubling the capacity of our consultation teams with expertise from across and outside of the government. And fourth, consultation will be specifically tailored to the groups we meet. Let me be clear, we are not starting over. We are building on the relationship we have, the information we have gathered, and the consultation done to date. And finally, as we move through Phase 3 consultations, we will have access to the best possible advice from within and outside of government. I'm pleased to announce that our government has appointed former Supreme Court of Canada Justice, the Honorable Frank Iacobucci, as federal representative to oversee the consultation process. He will initially provide advice on designing the process and will then oversee it to ensure the Indigenous consultations are meaningful and comply with the direction given by the Federal Court of Appeal. I am confident that Phase 3 consultation process will be better, owing to his expertise and advice working with First Nations in Ontario in the development of the Ring of Fire and as part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. Taken together with our instructions to the National Energy Board, These initiatives represent tangible and substantial ways that our government will follow on our duty to consult on TMX moving forward in the right way. Let me repeat. We are committed to working with Indigenous groups to address their concerns, and we believe it's worth taking the time to get it right together. With these first steps, we have every confidence that we can do so. We truly believe the Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Project is an investment in Canada's future, but it must move forward in the right way. Thank you.
Do you have any remarks in French?
No.
Mia Robson, Canadian Press.
Minister, you seem to still be talking as if approval for this project is sort of a fait accompli and that you're just going to listen and maybe make any changes. How can you call it meaningful consultation if you're going in assuming that it's going to be approved in the end?
We have been very clear that for this project to move forward, we have instructed the NEB to redo the issues related to marine shipping, to understand the impact of marine shipping on the marine environment. And we're also very clear, for this project to move forward, we need to engage in a meaningful two-way dialogue and listen carefully to the concerns of Indigenous peoples and offer accommodation where accommodation is possible. After concluding those things, Cabinet will re-examine that decision and make that appropriate decision at that appropriate time.
Some of the Indigenous communities in British Columbia are suggesting moving the entire terminal away from the Burrard Inlet over into Tsawwassen. Is that such a huge change, something the government would even consider in this process?
My role is to make sure that our consultation teams that we will put together have the mandate to meaningfully listen and consult and offer accommodations where those accommodations are possible. As you may know from the Federal Court of Ruling, one of the criticism of the or one of the issues that court has identified, that people who were leading the consultation didn't feel that they have the proper mandate to offer accommodations. We are not going to presuppose what we're going to hear from indigenous communities, and we're going to listen very carefully. And if there are appropriate accommodations to be made, those will be considered.
Philippe Vincent, Radio-Canada.
Good morning. You expect the project? When do you expect the project to begin? In a few weeks? In a few months? Before the election? After the election? We want to ensure the consultations are made with the groups in the region, and that they're bi-directional. We don't just want to listen. We want it to be a dialogue, and we also want to take their concerns into consideration and accommodate them where possible. We want to take the time required to do that. The Court of Appeal was quite clear. There is one path forward for us, and we want to go about it the proper way. So we haven't set a deadline for ourselves. We just want to make sure the project moves forward properly, and that means proper consultations with First Nations of the region. Are you sure the conclusion is that there will be a project? You're consulting in the best possible way, but not whether or not the project will go forward. Is that right? Well, at this time, we're going to consult. At this time, the NEB is conducting its own study when it comes to marine shipping, and they're going to provide us with a report within the next 9 to 20 weeks. And then, but then with Indigenous groups, we want to ensure that we've listened to them, that their rights are being respected, and we're going to move forward along the path indicated by the Supreme Court.
What kind of timeline do you see for this in terms of an end point for the consultations, and what happens if, even after all that, you get taken to court again?
I just want to make it absolutely clear that, as I said in my opening remarks, for us to figure this project out, to get it moving forward in the right way, we need to make sure that we are consulting and engaging with Indigenous communities with open mind and good faith, which means that we will not put a stop clock on the consultations. But we are also following the direction that has given to us by the federal court. federal court has said that meaningful consultation can take place in a focused and an efficient manner. So with that, we're going to be going into the communities with open mind and engaging and listening and learning from them and seeking their help in designing and the input into how we need to move forward on this important project. But we're going to take our time to figure this right, because that's the best way to move forward on this project.
The court, like what if you get taken to court again after all this and it goes back to court and there's more legal limbo?
No, after everything is done through the NEB process as well as through the consultation that we are initiating today, if there are outstanding issues that people feel that they need to take to the courts, that's the right to do so, right? But we are going to do these consultations in a way that allows us to meet our constitutional obligation to meaningfully consult with Indigenous peoples, and we're going to do our best, and we're going to work hard to make sure that we do so.
Sean McCarthy, I'm sorry, actually, it was Carl Meyer, National Observer.
Hi, Mr. As you may know, Andrew Scheer said on Monday last week that the government should appoint a ministerial special representative to complete the Indigenous consultations. Sounds similar to what you're announcing today. Did you get the idea from him?
What we are announcing today is making sure that we engage Indigenous peoples to seek their input as we start this consultation. What we are announcing today is a doubling of the resources so that we have people on the ground. What we are announcing today is that we're going to rely on the whole of government as well as expertise from the outside so we can get this right. Our focus is to make sure that whatever we do, that we are able to meet our constitutional obligation, that we are seriously listening and considering the issues that have been identified, that will be identified by the Indigenous peoples.
Can you tell us if you had this process in motion before Mr. Scheer suggested the idea?
You know, we have given a lot of consideration after the Federal Court of Appeal ruling came. Our goal has always been, and my goal has always been, to make sure that whatever path we put forward is the best and appropriate path forward. And we feel that what we have announced today and what we have announced 2 weeks ago, directing the NEB to redo the issues related to marine shipping and marine safety and undertake that review, is the best path forward on this project.
Sean McCarthy, Globe and Mail.
Minister, the government is committed to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which includes the right to free, prior, and informed consent. What does that mean in this context? Do the First Nations along the pipeline route have the right to consent or not consent to the project?
What are we going to do, as we have done in the past, and build on the record that we have of the existing consultations and knowing of the existing concerns that some of them were dealt with and some of them that we will hear again from Indigenous groups. We're going to make our sincere effort to listen, consult, and offer accommodation where those accommodations are possible. But we also understand that there might be groups that will still oppose this project. That's fine, because that's the right to do so. But that does not mean that if we fulfill our constitutional obligation, that those groups may have a veto to stop this project. That is not our understanding of our obligations to fulfill our constitutional responsibilities to meaningfully consult with Indigenous peoples.
Sean, do you have a follow-up?
No, that's good. Thank you.
David Aiken, Global News.
Minister, good morning. Just a quick one. I think the ruling that you're responding to was out August 31st or somewhere, end of August, if I remember correctly. And we're in October. I'm just wondering, this seems like such an obvious course of action for your government, and why it took a month. And a lot of people want to get to work in this project. Why did it take a month to come to this decision?
One thing that I'm committed to doing, David, is that we would not cut corners as we move forward on this project. In the past, when the decision was made in 2012 to initiate the review of this project, decision was made to cut corners. And that decision was that NEB should not consider the impact of marine shipping on the marine environment. We are here to make sure that we move forward on this project in the right way. This is a project that is going to help us grow our economy, create jobs, and allow us to expand our non-US global markets. But for this project to move forward, if this project is going to move forward, we have to figure it out to move forward in the right way, which means redoing the review that was not done under previous administration and building on the framework that we put in place, and where we fell short, overcoming those shortcomings by meaningfully engaging with Indigenous peoples.
Do you have a follow-up, David?
No, thank you, sir.
Okay, great, thanks. Tom Perry, CBC.
Minister, you just said that there are going to be groups that are still going to be opposed to this. So do you foresee that if you're going to get this project through, that you're going to have to, in a sense, force it through over the objections of some groups, First Nations, who are opposed to this?
What I'm saying is that it is my responsibility, it is our government's responsibility to engage in a meaningful way, two-way dialogue, a sincere, serious dialogue with all Indigenous groups who are impacted by this through our Phase 3 consultation. We're going to make every effort to listen to their concerns and offer accommodations where accommodations are possible to be offered. And that's where we're starting from. After that, if there are groups, I hope there will not be. If there are, we will, we will make that decision at that particular time.
But how do you deal with groups, with First Nations, who are just opposed to this?
We acknowledge that there are very diverse point of views among Indigenous communities as among other Canadians on the resource development, right? Not every Canadian agrees on how we develop our resources or how we move forward on many other projects. That diversity is something that we cherish because we live in a democratic, free country, and people are entitled to have their views and their views to be heard. What we're going to do on this is that we're going to engage with all of those 117 impacted Indigenous groups on this line and listen to them carefully. And if they're still against it, at that time, appropriate decision will be made by the cabinet and NEB process, independent process, that they will make recommendations to the government. And after that, and after we conclude Phase 3 consultation, cabinet will consider all the things that all the issues that we will hear and how we are offering those accommodation. And if at that time the appropriate decision will be made.
Joyce Napier, CTV.
Good morning, Minister. I'm wondering about the timing of these consultations with Indigenous communities. You said you want to take your time to do it properly. Are we talking 1 year, 2 years? Could it be 3 years? Just to get a sort of ballpark here, what you're sort of thinking going forward.
We believe that meaningful consultation can be undertaken in a focused and efficient manner, as court has identified that it can be done. We are not starting from the scratch. we have a lot of information that we gathered during the first consultation that took place under the initial review. So we're going to rely and build on that information. We are going to engage, and we know what issues that have been identified in the past and what new issues might be identified. So we're not starting from the scratch. We have a lot of information to rely on under the previous review.
Yes, but my question, I'm sorry, was about 1 year, 2 years. I understand that you're not starting from scratch. That was not my question, sir. My question was, are you thinking it could take 1 year, 2 years?
We're not going to put a timeline on these consultations because we feel that it is our duty to faithfully engage with Indigenous communities to get this right. And by having a definitive timeline, we feel that that something is not appropriate at this time. But we also follow the direction from the court, and the court has been very clear that focused, efficient, that meaningful consultation can take place in a focused and an efficient manner.
Greg Quinn, Bloomberg News.
Wait a minute, sorry, that was the same question.
I'm sorry, we move on. Greg Quinn, Bloomberg News.
Could you explain a little bit more detail why you didn't appeal the court's decision? Were they effectively right in what they found?
First of all, we have a constitutional obligation to consult with Indigenous peoples. So you can't, first of all, legislate your responsibilities by having a legislation put in place, because you still have to meet those constitutional obligations. On the appeal, we feel that the path forward that we have developed is more efficient and more appropriate, and will get us to this the best path forward. Appealing a decision is not efficient way of dealing with this this issue, because appeals can take years to conclude. But we also feel that our government takes very seriously the environmental responsibilities that we have, which has been identified by the federal court, that those responsibilities were overlooked. We also take very seriously the shortfall that has been identified by the federal court on our duty to consult. So those are the values that are very near and dear to our government: protecting the environment, growing our economy, and meaningful consultation with Indigenous peoples are essential for energy project to move forward. And that is why we feel that appealing this decision is not the right decision.
Secondly, sir, you've invested $4.5 billion to purchase this project outright. The Prime Minister has said time and time again, this is in the national interest. It seems like these consultations might be conditions around pipelines, which often have hundreds of conditions on them. Can you really go into a federal election next year not getting this project going forward with shovels in the ground?
What we have purchased is an existing asset that moves the resources currently through their pipe. And that existing asset also generates a revenue for the government. And in addition to buying the existing asset, we also purchased the assets that are necessary to build to expand this pipeline. But my role in this is to make sure that we are moving forward on this project in the right way, and the issues that I have identified and that we need to deal with. We're not going to make decisions based on election cycles. We're going to make a decision based on what is best for us to figure this right, and what is best path forward, which is responding to the issues that court has identified.
Minister, we have one more question in the room from Presse Canadienne, and we have some people on the line, so I'd like to take a couple of questions on the line in case they're from out west. Yeah. So if we could go to the operator and see if there is any other question, and we'll come back to the room for a second round if they can take them, okay? But I'm trying to give everyone a question.
Thank you. Merci. We will not take questions from a telephone line. Nous allons maintenant passer à la période de questions. If you have a question and you are using a speakerphone, please lift the handset before making your selection. Si vous utilisez un téléphone main libre, s'il vous plaît, soulevez le combiné avant d'effectuer votre sélection. If you have a question, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad. Si vous désirez poser une question, veuillez s'il vous plaît appuyer sur les touches étoile 1 de votre téléphone à clavier. If at any time you wish to cancel the question, please press the pound sign. Vous pouvez à tout moment annuler votre question en appuyant sur la dièse. Please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. S'il vous plaît, appuyez sur l'étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. There will be a brief pause while the participant register for questions. Il y aura un court délai vous permettant de vous enregistrer dans la file d'attente pour la période de questions. Thank you for your patience. Merci de patienter. Once again, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad if you have a question or comment. De nouveau, n'hésitez pas de faire étoile 1 pour toute question ou commentaire.
Okay, it doesn't sound like we have any questions on the line. I'm going to come back to the room because I didn't give Hélène her question, and my apologies, Hélène. I thought I had you crossed off here. Please go ahead.
That's okay. So, Minister, you said earlier that you don't want to put a stop clock to this process. So I'm just wondering, what guarantee do you have that those groups opposed to the Trans Mountain Pipeline will play the clock and ensure that de facto that the project never gets through?
Ever since being appointed to this position by the Prime Minister, I have been reaching out to Indigenous peoples even prior to the decision of August 30th. And after the decision, I have been also reaching out to Indigenous groups. We are going to engage in good faith, and we're going to engage in a meaningful way in listening very seriously to the concerns that Indigenous groups have identified and they will identify in the consultation. We believe that by sitting on the table in a sincere effort to listen is something that we need to do, and we hope that all the Indigenous groups will take the same approach to engaging with us.
But do you have some mechanism to ensure that doesn't take place, that people don't talk to death, and just ensure that we don't get through this process at all?
I have faith in the groups that we will engage with, that they will engage with us in an appropriate and meaningful way, because I'm pretty sure they want to reach to the conclusion on this file as well, and I have no reason not to believe that people will not engage in good faith.
Mylène Crête, Presse Canadienne.
Mylène Crête, Presse Canadienne.
You would have an open mind during these consultations, but you already committed to getting the pipeline built. So can you explain that to me? How can you have an open mind and consider the concerns that will be brought forward? Yeah.
So when you look at the federal court ruling, they have identified two issues. One is being currently dealt by the NEB, which is scoping the impact of marine shipping on the marine environment. NEB will produce a report and a recommendation to Cabinet for reconsideration. This group, what we are announcing today, will engage in a meaningful way, two-way dialogue with Indigenous groups to listen and offer accommodations where accommodations are possible. And after the conclusion of this consultation, after the conclusion of the NEB review, new recommendation will be made to Cabinet. At that time, Cabinet will decide what appropriate action to take on those recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
And Sean has his follow-up.
Yes, Minister. By not appealing, one of the issues that was in contention was whether the National Energy Board had the mandate and the responsibility to make conclusions on marine shipping and offshore issues rather than just the pipeline itself. So by not appealing, have you enshrined that? Is that already included in C-69 that the new Impact Assessment Board would have responsibility beyond the shores? So how is that issue that the court dealt with affected by your decision not to appeal?
We believe that the decision made under the previous administration not to include the impact of marine shipping on the marine environment was a wrong decision. That is why we are correcting that decision by giving a mandate to NEB to consider that impact. One thing is clear from this federal court ruling, that in order to move forward on large energy infrastructure projects such as pipelines, you cannot ignore the impact of those projects on the environment. You cannot ignore the environment science. And you cannot ignore your constitutional obligations to meaningfully consult with Indigenous peoples. That's how the shortcoming has been identified because of those two failures. Also keep in mind that this is not the first project that has fallen short of expectations of our obligations. Northern Gateway Pipeline Project decision made by the NEB under the previous admission, that decision was completely quashed by the federal court because it fell short on meeting the environmental obligation as well as obligations on the Indigenous peoples. So moving forward, Bill C-69 allows us to keep all those things in mind and puts a framework together that allows those things to be considered earlier on in the early engagement and consultation phase. So we feel that Bill C-69 is the appropriate way to move forward so that these mistakes are not repeated.
So I'm told we can take a couple more questions. Mia, second round, just go right ahead.
One of the things the court decision talked about was the failure for an actual minister to be involved enough in consultations with Indigenous peoples. How involved are you personally going to be at the table in this round of consultation?
I have been taken on this responsibility from the day when I was appointed, that to engage with Indigenous peoples and listening to their concerns and building a stronger relationship with them is part of my responsibility, and I have been doing that from day one. I have been visiting Indigenous communities, and I will continue to do so in my role. It is my responsibility to oversee this consultation process because it falls under my area of responsibility, and I will be paying very careful attention, and I'll be involved in building those relationships with Indigenous leaders.
Tom Perry, CBC.
Minister, you were talking about how you're going to be doing these consultations and how Cabinet is going to come up with a recommendation or a decision at the end of all this. Is there any scenario you see where Cabinet could say, you know what, we can't go ahead with this. There's too much opposition to it, or is the position of the government that this is going to go forward in some form, no matter what you hear?
Our government's focus has been from day one that growing our economy, creating jobs, and making sure that we are expanding our global non-U.S. market for our natural resources is a priority. But we need to move forward on these projects in the right way, which means that we need to meet our constitutional obligations, and we also need to figure out how do we deal with the environmental issues that are part and parcel, or should have been part and parcel of this review. We are going to rely on the recommendations from the NEB. We're going to, rely on what we hear from Indigenous communities through these consultations, and based on those consultations, new recommendation will be made. And I will not presuppose the decision that that cabinet will make based on the information that will be in front of the cabinet at that time after the conclusion of these two processes.
Last question to Hélène Bizzetti.
Is there a reason why the Indigenous minister is not here? Why the Indigenous minister is not here to make that announcement?
The entire government is working on this. On the consultation aspect, every department is involved, and Minister Bennett has been consulted. Her staff and her department will be involved in the consultation, as would the other departments who deal with Indigenous communities or may not deal with Indigenous communities. Our approach to draw on the best expertise within all of our government departments, as well as from the outside. So Minister Bennett and her departments engaged on this file.
We've gotten the hook. Thanks very much. Thanks, Minister, for coming today. Thanks very much, everybody.